So from my perch, sitting here on the moon, looking at the events that's taking place on the planet Earth, ever vigilant in this task, I did a clip yesterday of Maddow. Now, I personally would describe this as Maddow fearlessly as an intrepid reporter going to the limits of sanity and good sense and pushing bravely beyond. You can make a case that it's brave. You can also make a case that she was in a fit of Russia deranged hysteria. I tend to lean toward the latter analysis of this. Nevertheless, I'm going to show this, but I'm also going to show how farcical this is when hefted against reality. She needs to be very careful with her show. In her pursuit of Donald Trump, to not look like Fox News looked during the Obama years. I'm just saying, this was a fit of lunacy and hysteria that even for Rachel Maddow was out there. Take a look at her clip first. She's nearly running into a seizure. Come on. There we are. It's just going slow.
And it is like negative 50 degrees in the Dakotas right now. What would happen if Russia...
By the way, just so you, in case you don't know what I'm talking about, yesterday Rachel Maddow did a segment. In that segment, she used the cold snap, meaning the fact that we have freezing temperatures here in the United States. In Fargo, I think it was like negative 40 degrees, some insane temperatures. People even froze to death in some of these places. Using the fact that there's a cold snap to tie it into the Russians are coming! The Russians are coming! And scream. Look, personally, I think she's screaming at the camera, but maybe it's the fit of hysteria that it's coming across that way. Maybe the energy of it comes across that way. But taking a natural phenomenon in regards to nature and something that's somewhat unfortunate but infinitely foreseeable, seeing as it's going to happen at some point, brutally cold temperatures, and using that to cover into the Russians are going to come to get you, and the Russians have the potential to shut down the power grid. What would it be like if you were outside and you were cold? What if you and your family and your baby froze to death because the Russians and the Chinese, they're coming to get us! They're coming to get us! She did that segment. Now the catch becomes, what is the reality of this? Even if there was somewhat of an assessment that Richard Maddow was basing this segment on, what is the reality of this? And why are you fear-mongering to grandmothers, to grandpa and grandmas, making them terrified? And by the way, what would neocon tough hawk Rachel Maddow, who's supposed to be a lib, what would this tough hawk that's turned into a neocon during the Trump administration, what does she propose to do about this? How muscular as she wants to get? And what does it even mean to be muscular in a sense of foreign policy against another nuclear power? I'm curious. She's using this purely as an attack point for Donald Trump. But again, this idea that the Russians cheated Hillary Clinton and put Donald Trump in that office, this seems to be a trope that she has been running with for the past several years. But I got to be honest, even for her, this is a bridge too far. Take a look at Rachel Maddow's thing first, and then I'm going to show you Washington Post completely deboning this. Washington Post had debunked this like a year prior to Rachel Maddow doing this skit. So it kind of, and I'll explain why this is nonsense.
Killed the power in Fargo today, right? What would happen if all the natural gas lines negative, and it is like negative 50 degrees in the Dakotas right now. What would happen if Russia killed the power in Fargo today, right? What would happen if all the natural gas lines that service Sioux Falls just poofed on the coldest day in recent memory, and it wasn't in our power whether or not to turn them back on? I mean, what would you do if you lost heat indefinitely as the act of a foreign power on the same day the temperature in your front yard matched the temperature in Antarctica? I mean, what would you and your family do?
Now, personally, there should be due diligence to make sure that we're protected and that a foreign power doesn't do that. Part of that due diligence is making sure we're not giving a foreign power a reason to do that. That's the first point. Second point is somewhat of a technical thing and making sure that our systems are intact. Beyond the due diligence, let's be honest, all countries, particularly countries that are enemies with one another, or at the very least are not on good terms, are going to try to subdue and find ways to undermine other countries in any way that they could possible. If you find me on the street and you attack me, it is perfectly okay for me to hit you in the throat as hard as I possibly can if it's what I need to do to run away. I'm saying it's not insane for countries to do this and make assessments like this. It becomes a second point of A, whether they can do it, B, whether they're going to do it. Meaning, is this something that's imminent, or is this something that's somewhat of a technical thing? And either way, why are you doing a story saying what would you do if Russia shuts down the power grid, when you have nothing to show that Russia is attempting to shut down the power grid? And then the secondary question of whether it's even possible to shut it down in the way that she's talking about. I mean, she's like, what would you do? What would you do? It's like, what would you do if Russia built a big dome and they put it over your house and they wouldn't let you get any access to the internet or to porn? What would you do? It's like, fuck's sake, I don't know. I guess I wouldn't be watching porn at that point. But let's look at the technical achievement part. So Washington Post does a story, and Washington Post's point is this is practically impossible. Washington Post. In fact, look at the name of the Washington Post article, because apparently there was field-mongering about this once before. Why Russia hackers aren't poised to plunge the United States into darkness. Why they're not poised to do so. So right here, the natural question that emerges is, how serious is this hacking? The idea of Russian hackers having access to the control switches of American power infrastructure is particularly unnerving, raising the idea of waking up one morning and learning that the United States has simply been switched off. That is what it sounds like Rachel Maddow is talking about. That Vladimir Putin is just going to flick a button and poof, all of the electricity across the United States is going to go out. You're going to be in the bathroom, you're going to be taking a dump, and the lights are going to go out. It's like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I can't find the toilet paper. Fucking Russians. Just saying. Several experts who spoke with the Washington Post, though, explained that this is not only overly simplistic, oh, the Rhodes Scholars being called overly simplistic, but also that it's almost certainly impossible. The effects of infiltration of America's power grid would be much more geographically limited thanks to the distribution of redundant natural nature of systems. In fact, it's more of a little like another alert issued by the government about Russian infiltration efforts, the one on October 7, 2016, warning about Russian efforts to tamper with the state voting systems. So let's go back. This is what it looks like, the grid, power grid. Don't leave, but open it. I want people to see it. I want this to be clear. All right. That's power grid. That fuckery of lines. What we think of the grid as a nation network of transmission lines crisscrossing the country, interconnected, something like this. The very point that they said network kind of gets across is something like a group coming together. Sergio Katigryan, I went for it, is the director of threat intelligence at the firm Dragos, which creates a tool to protect industrial control systems. In a phone conversation with the Post, he explained how the grid is composed. It is not a single entity. That person said, Katigryan said, God, that name. We're talking about almost 1,000 independent utilities operating across the United States in a partially connected environment. The grid is 3 separate grids, he said. The eastern interconnection covers most of the United States east of the Rocky Mountains. The western interconnection covers the other side of the range. And then there's the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, because Texas does its own thing. Don't mess with Texas. Taking down all 3 of those grids at once is probably beyond the technical capability of any hackers, Calderon said, and will require so much preparation that it would almost certainly not escape notice. Within each of the interconnections are independent utilities running power generation systems, coal-burning power plants, wind turbines, etc., transmission lines carrying high-voltage electricity long distances, and distribution systems, the substations that convert high-voltage electricity, sometimes in your house, that you can use it in lines to carry it. Electric grids are fairly resilient, Brad Botch, lead in cybersecurity and privacy at the PwC, said in a phone conversation. When there's physical damage, such as ice storms, hurricanes, and that sort of thing, they tend to wreak a good deal of havoc, but overall they're fairly resilient and well engineered, so there's a lot of redundancy. So if a certain transmission line goes down, then there's, for the most part, some redundancy for power to be rerouted to another direction. The thing that saves the grid, honestly, is that the grid goes down all the time. I don't know if that's a good thing. The grid is highly reliable because it has to be, because the environment is so unreliable. Essentially, look, the grid is somewhat resilient. This idea that they're going to take down the grid is somewhat nonsense. What's more, key systems aren't directly connected to the internet or one another. This threat that Rachel Maddow is talking about is fear-mongering. It's fear-mongering. I just want that to be very clear. I'm putting the Washington Post article at the bottom for you to read for yourself. Is it conceptually possible that somebody could do... Yes, it's possible. All sorts of things are possible. Is it likely? The answer seems to be no. Provided we're not in a war or something. And we don't give them reason. But that's it. Rachel Maddow's flipping out. I think she needs to calm down. I'll leave it here. If you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support the PayPal or Patreon. And I'll see you tomorrow morning. By the way, I have a radio show tomorrow evening. I'm going to be on Garland Nixon's show in D.C. And I'm going to be on By All Means Necessary. By Any Means Necessary. I'm sorry. I'm sputting it. Thanks all. See you soon.